They didn't ban the Dodge Charger Daytona because it was unsafe. They banned it because it made everyone else look bad. Behind the scenes, racing bosses changed the rules to stop it from winning too much. Let's uncover the untold truth behind one of the most powerful, most feared cars in history. Back in the year 1957, something big happened. The people in charge of car safety and insurance got really upset with how dangerous racing had become. They said, "Hey, car companies, stop racing your cars." So, the Automobile Manufacturers Association, or AMA for short, told all the car companies to stop. No more racing. Just build cars for everyday driving. At first, this was sad news. Racing was exciting. But then came the Volkswagen Beetle and the Eisenhower recession. Suddenly, small and cheap cars were the new trend. People wanted to save money. Racing didn't seem that important anymore. But guess what? By the year 1962, everything changed again. The car industry was back, stronger than ever. The companies wanted to race again. The people wanted speed. The roads were calling. Now let's fast forward to the year 1963. Chrysler, one of the biggest American car companies, said, "Forget the no racing rule. We're going back in." They were ready to face their biggest rival, Ford. And to do that, Chrysler needed a super strong engine. They brought back something very powerful, the Hemi. It was short for hemispherical, which is just a fancy word that means round. This engine was big, strong, and very fast. Soon, Dodge and Plymouth cars with Hemi engines were blowing away the competition. At the Daytona races in 1964, the Hemi cars zoomed past everyone. They were unstoppable, but the happy times didn't last long. Ford came back with its own huge engines and special race features. The battle was on. In the year 1966, Dodge introduced a new car called the Charger. It had a fastback shape, which means it looked kind of like a race car from the future. Everyone thought it would be super fast. But when it raced, it didn't win much. It was more stylish than speedy. 2 years later, in 1968, Dodge made the Charger even better. It now looked like a strong and cool muscle car. For the race versions, Dodge added little spoilers, like wings, to help the cars stick to the track. This made the Charger more slippery in the wind, but it was still slower than Ford's cars. In racing, even being 1 mile per hour slower is a big deal. That's like losing by the length of a football field every single lap. So Dodge said, "That's it. We need something brand new." That's when they started building a car, just for one big reason, to win races, and they called it the Dodge Charger Daytona. Here's where things got really exciting. The 1968 Charger still had a big problem. It would lift up at the back during races, which made it less stable. The engineers came up with a wild idea. They added a super tall wing at the back, which helped keep the car stuck to the ground. It looked like something from outer space. They also gave the car a super pointy nose called a nose cone. It replaced the regular front grille and helped the car cut through the air like a knife. This crazy new Charger was named after the famous Daytona 500 race. Dodge said, "Let's make 500 cars so we can race this thing in NASCAR." That was the rule. If you wanted to race a car, you had to build at least 500 of them and sell them to the public. They ended up building a little more than 500. Some say 503 and some say 505. Nobody knows the exact number, but it wasn't many. And guess what? The car worked. All the changes made it about 5 miles per hour faster than the older Chargers. Suddenly, Dodge had a car that could finally beat Ford and Mercury on the racetrack. Now, here's something really cool. The people who actually built the Daytona weren't regular Dodge workers. Dodge got help from a special team in Detroit called Creative Industries. They had worked on lots of unique car projects before, and they knew how to build something different. Even though Dodge only needed to build 500 cars, something funny happened. More than 1,200 people went to their dealers and said, "We want one of those." Dodge had to send telegrams, yes, real old-school telegrams, to dealers saying, "Please ask your customer to pick another car." That's how rare and special the Daytona was. Even though the Charger Daytona cost about $300, more than the regular Charger RT, Dodge didn't make money on it. In fact, they lost between $1,000 and $1,500 for each one sold. But Dodge didn't care. They didn't build this car to make money. They built it to win races. The Daytona won its very first race, the Talladega 500. That's where it made history, as the first car to ever go close to 200 miles per hour on a closed track. That was a big deal back then. Nobody had ever gone that fast in a race car built from a real street car. People were shocked. This car didn't just look fast, it was fast. It had a huge wing, a nose cone, and a name that everybody recognized. Even Richard Petty, the famous race car driver who had left Dodge for Ford, started thinking about coming back. And he did. That's how powerful the Daytona's return to racing was. But the wildest part? The car wasn't just made to win races. It came with some of the craziest features ever seen on a car that you could actually buy. Let's take a ride through what made the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona so legendary, just by looking at the way it was built. Power. Now get this. Under the hood, the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona packed some serious muscle. The standard engine was a 426 cubic inch Magnum V8. That's a whopping 440 cubic inches of pure strength. It could pump out an incredible 375 horsepower. That much power meant this beast could fly down the road like a rocket on wheels. People who drove it said it felt like a jet taking off. But wait, there's more. If someone wanted even more power, they could pay extra and get the legendary 426 cubic inch Hemi Phi 8 engine. It was loud, mean, and totally wild. Only 70 out of all 503 Daytonas ever built got this special engine. That makes the Hemi Daytona super rare and super cool. Even though the Hemi could be a bit loud at low speeds, it kind of sounded like a coffee can full of rocks. Once you hit the gas, it came alive like nothing else. Drivers said it would blast off while other cars were still yawning. That's how strong the Hemi was. But how did it all connect? Let's check out the transmission. The Daytona had two choices. You could go with a 4-speed manual if you wanted to shift gears yourself and feel like a real racer. Or, if you like things smooth and easy, you could pick the 3-speed Torque Flight 727 automatic transmission. That one was super popular too. Underneath, this car was no joke either. It came with a heavy-duty suspension and brake system. This was important for all that power. It needed to stop fast and turn sharp. It had power brakes with disc brakes up front, plus power steering to help drivers handle it with ease. Driving it felt strong but also smooth, like floating on top of a thunderstorm. Now look at the outside. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona looked like something straight out of a comic book, and every part of its crazy design had a serious purpose. This car wasn't built to just turn heads. It was built to dominate racetracks and slice through the air like a rocket ship. Its shape was fine-tuned in wind tunnels, where engineers tested and adjusted everything to make sure the Daytona could fly down the NASCAR track as fast and smoothly as possible. Let's start with the front of the car. Instead of the flat grille found on a regular Charger, the Daytona had a sharply pointed nose cone. This special nose cone stretched almost 2 full feet beyond the normal front end and was made from fiberglass. It wasn't just for show. It reduced drag by helping air move cleanly over the car's body. That meant the engine didn't have to work as hard to fight the wind, letting the Daytona go much faster. The nose also gave the car a sleeker profile and added front downforce, which pushed the tires harder against the track and gave the car a better grip. That's super important when you're racing over 180 miles per hour. Moving to the back of the car is where the wild really kicks in. The Daytona had a gigantic rear wing bolted right to the rear deck. This wing wasn't some little decoration. It stood a full 34 inches tall and stretched 64 inches across. That's nearly 3 feet high and over 5 feet wide. It was made from lightweight aluminum and served a massive job, giving the car serious downforce at high speeds. Without that wing, the back of the car could lift up from the wind, making it lose control. With it, the Daytona stayed glued to the road. Even cooler, the wing was adjustable. Teams could tilt it to different angles, depending on the racetrack or weather, to get the perfect balance between drag and grip. But Dodge didn't stop there. The Daytona also had a special air dam up front to keep wind from rushing under the car. Instead, it directed air around the car to keep it stable and cool. And the back window? Dodge engineers reshaped it by adding a metal cap over the sunken glass. This turned the rear glass into a flat panel so air could slip over it smoothly. The change might seem small, but it cut down turbulence and improved the car's top-end speed. The body itself got other changes too. For one, the roofline was slightly taller than a regular Charger, giving it a better aerodynamic shape. The rear end was also extended to help support the huge wing. Even the hood and fenders were unique to the Daytona. They were styled more like the upcoming 1970 Charger, even though this car came out in 1969. The fenders had little scoops built in to help cool the front brakes. When you're racing flat out, brakes can get super hot, so any cooling helps performance. There were even stainless steel covers on the A-pillars and metal posts on either side of the windshield to smooth out the air as it moved past the front glass. On top of its race-bred shape, this particular Daytona was ordered with nearly every option possible. It wore a stunning F8 dark green metallic paint job, with matching green steel wheels and black accents on the rear quarters and spoiler. The stainless trim gleamed, and the color combination gave the car an intimidating, sleek look. This Daytona was not just about performance. It had style and rare factory upgrades that made it even more special. Only 70 of these were built with the 426 Hemi engines, and just 22 were paired with the A833 4-speed manual transmission. That combo, along with the Super Track pack, featuring a Dana 60 rear axle, a 4.1 gear ratio, and a Sure Grip limited slip differential, made this version extremely rare. From its towering wing to its needle-sharp nose, the outside of the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona was a rolling science experiment, and every inch of it worked. Inside. Beyond the wild outside, open the door and step into a cockpit built for both comfort and high-speed control. The Dodge Charger Daytona's interior may look classic at first glance, but it holds a mix of period-correct charm and hidden modern upgrades that take it to the next level. Most Daytonas came with front bucket seats, wide, comfortable, and firm enough to keep the driver locked in during fast cornering. Between them sat a center console, complete with a wood grain trim and easy access to the gear shifter. One of the rarest options was the CW6 white and black interior combo. This color scheme made the cabin feel sharp, clean, and sporty, and it looked amazing next to the glossy exterior paint. Another factory option, the C16 wood grain console, added a rich, classic feel to the space. The dashboard layout was all about giving the driver control. Two large dials, a speedometer and a tachometer, sat right in front of the wheel. The tachometer, part of the N85 option, even included a built-in clock. To the right, 4 smaller gauges showed fuel level, oil pressure, temperature, and battery power. This full set of instrumentation made it easy to keep tabs on the car's performance in real time. The dash also featured wood paneling that gave it a rugged, cabin-like touch with a touch of style, making the interior feel both race-ready and refined. The steering wheel was the sport-style, wood-rimmed type, and the pedals were finished with chrome trim, offering a stylish flash even under your feet. Dodge didn't skimp on comfort either. There was a 6-way adjustable driver's seat, tinted glass to block out the sun, and factory-installed power windows under the P31 option. These luxury touches were rare in muscle cars of the era, but made the Daytona feel like a premium ride. The radio setup in this car included the Chrysler solid-state AM unit with an 8-track player, so you could blast your favorite tunes while cruising. Some Daytonas came with the Music Master AM, or even an AM/FM option, but this one had it all. There was also the A01 light package, a remote left-hand mirror, and even a locking gas cap, because when you own something this rare, you want to protect it. While the interior looks stock, it includes clever modern updates. A vintage air unit is tucked into the dash, blending old-school style with modern-day cooling power. Even the console is a reproduction add-on chosen to match the car's original layout, while providing updated comfort. Now, step outside and take a closer look beneath the body. This Daytona might appear to be factory-stocked from far away, but it's hiding some serious hardware underneath. The suspension system has been fully upgraded with a Hotchkiss setup, UMIA arms, and Bilstein gas shocks. Caltrac traction bars in the rear help transfer all that muscle to the pavement without wheel hop. The car rides noticeably lower, with the front end dropped by 2 inches and the rear lowered by 1 inch. This lower stance gives the Daytona a meaner, race-ready look, while also improving handling. Let's talk tires and wheels. The 1969 Daytona came with styled road wheels, wrapped in special Daytona Radial SR tires. These tires weren't just regular rubber. They were meant to grip the road better and help with that high-speed handling. When this car moved, it grabbed the pavement as it owned it. Some Daytonas came with the A36 Performance Axle package. This gave the car a 3.55 gear ratio and a sure grip differential. That meant both back wheels spun together instead of just one. This gave better control and faster takeoffs. It was perfect for people who wanted real drag racing performances on the street. And let's not forget about the color. The Daytona came in lots of amazing paint jobs, but one of the most famous was bright green metallic with a white wing. That combo made the car look like a superhero's ride. It turned heads everywhere it went. Collectors today love every little part. Even the window sticker is a treasure. Imagine seeing that it costs $5.40 extra for fancy windshield wipers. Everything on this car was chosen with care. From the small stuff like the radio, to the big stuff like the roaring V8 under the hood. Trouble at top speed. Now, let's keep going with this amazing story. We already know the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona looked like something from the future with its giant nose and huge rear wing, but that wild design didn't happen just to look cool. It came from some very real problems. When Dodge first tried to race the regular Charger, it didn't do so great. The car had two major issues, and both had to do with air. First, the front of the regular Charger was way too flat and square. At high speeds, that boxy shape acted like a wall smashing into the air. Instead of slicing through the wind, the car pushed against it like a bulldozer. That made it slow and wobbly. The solution? Dodge engineers added a super long nose cone. It was about 18 inches long and pointed like a shark's snout. They even made the headlights hideaway so they wouldn't mess up the smooth shape. With that cone, the Daytona could finally cut through the air like a knife. But hold on, fixing one thing creates another. That sharp nose made the front of the car want to lift off the ground, almost like it was trying to fly. That was super dangerous for race drivers. So Dodge added a front spoiler, which is like a little wing under the bumper. That helped push the car back down and gave it more grip on the track. Next came the rear window. The Charger's original back window was sunken in, and that trapped air and caused turbulence. It made the back of the car wiggle around and lose speed. So engineers filled in that dip with a metal piece and made the window stand up straighter. That helped the airflow better and stopped the car from shaking at high speed. But wait, there's more. The biggest and most famous fix of all was the giant wing on the trunk. At first, it looked like something from an airplane. People thought it was a joke, but it was not funny at all. It was brilliant. The wing's job was to keep the back of the car stuck to the track. You see, when race cars go really fast, the air pushing on them can lift the rear end. That's not what you want when racing at speeds over 150 miles per hour. So Dodge made a 23-inch tall wing that created something called downforce. That means it pushed the car down like an invisible hand pressing it to the road. Now here's the really smart part. When they first tested the wing, it was shorter, but that caused a problem. The trunk lid couldn't open all the way. That's fine for a race car, but people buying these for the street needed to open their trunks. So Dodge simply made the wing taller, tall enough so the trunk lid could swing open under it. It was a small change that made a big difference. And now that tall wing is one of the coolest parts of the whole car. Record-smashing power. Let's talk about the results of all these fixes. Did they work? Oh yes, they did. The Daytona wasn't just better than the regular Charger, it became a total race monster. The car made its big debut at the Talladega race in September of 1969. Right out of the gate, it showed the world what it could do. Charlie Glotzbach drove the Daytona at that first race and set a new closed lap speed record. That means he drove faster than anyone else ever had on a circle track. But things really got exciting the next year. On March 24, 1970, driver Buddy Baker made history. He became the first NASCAR driver ever to go over 200 miles per hour on a closed track. Let that sink in. Over 200 miles per hour. That was something no one had officially done before. Buddy Baker and the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona broke a barrier that racers had been chasing for years. That moment became one of the most legendary achievements in racing history. Dodge engineers were there at the track that day, working with Buddy to squeeze every bit of speed out of the car. They kept making tiny changes and tweaks until the car was just right. When Buddy hit that magical 200 mark, they all knew they had made something truly special. Buddy even joked about it later. He said the engineers asked him if he wanted to break the next big speed record, 300 miles per hour. Buddy laughed and said, "Scratch my name off that trophy." He was fast, but not that fast. Buddy Baker wasn't the only Daytona driver to shine. Another big name was Bobby Isaac. He also drove a Daytona, and in 1970, he set a speed of 201.1 miles per hour at Talladega. That number stayed the record all the way until 1983. Bobby didn't just go fast in a straight line. He won race after race, grabbing 11 wins, 13 pole positions, and 38 top 10 finishes in one season.
186.335 miles an hour.
That helped Dodge win the NASCAR championship that year. Clearly, all those wild changes to the Charger had paid off. Bobby even took his Daytona to Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. That place is famous for setting speed records, and Bobby added 28 more to the list. Imagine that, a race car that looked strange, but just kept winning and winning. Street versions of the Daytona. Let's not forget about the street versions of the Daytona. One person who owns a real 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona is Colby Lynch from Brookfield, Connecticut. His car is original and unrestored, which makes it even more special. It's painted in a color called light yellow and has a white wing. Under the hood is a giant 440 cubic inch engine, along with a 3-speed automatic transmission and special rear gears for extra kick. Colby's car was first bought by an architect in Omaha, Nebraska, and it traveled around a bit before ending up in California. Colby got it from a friend named Jeff Post. Because it's in original condition, Colby doesn't drive it much. But really, he doesn't have to. Just owning this piece of racing history is enough to make any car fan jealous. But it wasn't easy. The Dodge engineers had to fight for every little change. The style department didn't always agree with the racing team. Some folks thought the car looked too weird. But in the end, the engineers won. They built a car for speed, not just for looks. And what do you get when you fix all those problems the right way? A record-breaking, race-winning legend. Racing was not fair, ban. Right after Dodge fixed all the big problems and made the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona a racetrack beast, people noticed something strange. It wasn't just better than the other cars. It was way better. Drivers in other cars didn't even stand a chance. They were getting left behind lap after lap. Fans could see it. Team owners could see it. And yes, NASCAR could definitely see it. At first, some folks thought it was just a lucky break. Maybe Dodge had a good year, but when the Daytona kept winning again and again, people started to say something wasn't right. The car was just too good. Other car companies were not happy. They spent a lot of money trying to keep up. Ford made the Torino Talladega. Mercury made the Cyclone Spoiler 2. They tried to copy the same idea with big, wild shapes to beat the air. But it was already too late. Dodge had figured it out first, and they had done it better than anyone else. Here's what happened next. When the 1969 racing season ended and the 1970 season started, the Dodge Charger Daytona, along with its cousin, the Plymouth Superbird, kept showing up at the front of the pack. In race after race, these aero cars were taking the wins. It wasn't even close. At the 1970 Daytona 500, something really shocking happened. More than 20 of the 40 cars on the track were either Dodge Daytonas or Plymouth Superbirds. That meant over half the field was filled with these fast, pointy-nosed, winged monsters. NASCAR officials were worried. They didn't like how racing was becoming a battle of who had the most wind tunnel tricks. So what did they do next? NASCAR makes a big move. By the time 1971 came around, NASCAR had seen enough. They decided to make new rules that would stop the Charger Daytona and the other aero cars from taking over every race. The first rule change was about engines. NASCAR said that if a car had special aerodynamic parts, like a long nose cone or a huge wing, it could not have an engine larger than 305 cubic inches. That was a big problem for Dodge. The Daytona was built around powerful engines like the 440 cubic inch and the famous 426 Hemi. These engines gave the car its top speed and power. But now, those engines were too big to use. With this new rule, the Charger Daytona was stuck. Sure, it could still race, but only with the smaller engine. And with less power, the whole point of its aerodynamic shape didn't really help anymore. What good is a slippery car if it doesn't have the muscle to keep up? It's not just that the Daytona won races. It destroyed the competition. In one season alone, the Daytona and the Superbird together won over 35 races. That kind of dominance made the sport feel unfair. Racing is supposed to be exciting. People want to see tight battles, lead changes, and surprise winners. But when one type of car always wins, fans get bored and teams get mad. NASCAR wanted to keep the racing close and fun for everyone. So, by changing the rules, they hoped to slow things down, literally. They didn't just ban big engines for aero cars. They also started limiting how wild the designs could be. The wings had to be smaller. Nose cones had to go. The wild shapes that made the Daytona so great were now against the rules. The person behind all of this was William France Sr. People called him Big Bill. He was the founder of NASCAR, and he made a lot of the big decisions for the sport. Big Bill liked fast cars, but he also cared about the fans and the future of NASCAR. He didn't want races to become boring just because one kind of car was too good. In Big Bill's eyes, the aero cars were fun but dangerous for the balance of racing. He wanted cars that looked more like what people drove on the street. After all, part of NASCAR's charm was that fans could cheer for cars that felt real and familiar. That's why in 1971, Big Bill helped rewrite the NASCAR rulebook. The Charger Daytona, the Plymouth Superbird, the Ford Talladega, and the Mercury Spoiler 2 were all pushed out of top racing. It wasn't because they were bad, it was because they were too good. When you build a car that wins too much, people stop cheering, they start complaining. That's what happened with the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. It was a work of genius, no doubt. But racing isn't just about being the best, it's about giving everyone a fair shot. NASCAR had to step in and make things more even. And let's be honest, it wasn't only about fairness, safety mattered too. Cars were going almost 200 miles per hour. That's fast enough to lift off the ground if the wind hits just right. NASCAR didn't want drivers flying off the track. So, banning the Daytona wasn't just about stopping Dodge. It was about saving the sport. They had to slow things down before someone got seriously hurt or before fans lost interest. Back to normal cars. With the Daytona and its cousins banned, NASCAR returned to simpler shapes and smaller engines. The cars looked more like what people drove to school or work. The races got closer again. Different drivers started winning. The sport felt more balanced. Some people missed the crazy wings and wild noses. Others were glad things felt normal again. But no matter how you feel, there's no doubt the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona changed everything. It was too fast, too smart, and just too good for its own good. But the Daytona story didn't stop on the racetrack. After the ban, Dodge didn't totally give up on their wild idea. One day, Elwood Engel, who was the head of styling at Dodge, looked at the Daytona and said, "What if we made it a convertible?" So they did. It wasn't for sale. It was just an idea, a wild one. The convertible was called the Dodge Supercharger, and it had no roof at all. It had a tiny windshield, fake side pipes, and only 2 seats. And that big wing? It was still there, just smaller. The car looked like something a comic book superhero might drive. But even though it looked cool, most people agreed it didn't make much sense. You couldn't race it. It didn't feel like a real Daytona. It was more of a show car than a street car. Even so, it got a tiny bit of fame. In 1974, the Supercharger showed up in a movie called Truck Turner. It was used by a flashy character as a pimp mobile. That's right, the fastest race car ever turned into a Hollywood ride for a movie gangster. Now let's talk about something funny. One of the most famous cartoon dads ever, Homer Simpson, once drove something that looked a lot like a Daytona. In an old episode of The Simpsons called The Way We Were, teenage Homer is shown with an old rusty car. It doesn't have a sharp nose, but it does have a huge wing on the back. It's clearly meant to look like a beat-up version of the Dodge Charger Daytona. In the show, the car's supposed to show that Homer was poor, it's falling apart, and full of rust. But here's the weird part. In real life, owning a Daytona is like owning a treasure. So, showing Homer driving one like it was garbage? Total disrespect. And the Simpsons weren't the only ones. In the movie Joe Dirt, the main character also has a dusty old Daytona. In Fast and Furious 6, one gets smashed up in a wild chase. Even the Spice Girls had one in a music video. And in Two-Lane Blacktop, a Chevelle somehow beats a Daytona in a race. Mopar fans still shake their heads at that one. Legacy. Even after all that, the name Daytona kept coming back. In 1976, Dodge used the name again on a slow, clunky car. It was based on the Chrysler Cordoba and had none of the real Daytona's magic. Still, it wore the badge. Then in 2006, Dodge brought the name back the right way. The modern Charger has a special Daytona trim with more power and better looks. Versions of this came out in 2006, 2007, 2008. 2009, 2013, and 2017. In 2020, Dodge released a Daytona with 717 horsepower.
Modulating the pedal to get as much traction as possible.
That's more than 3 times what the original Daytona had. And in 2024, Dodge took things electric. As part of their Last Call series, they built a special model called the Charger King Daytona. It was named after a street racing legend, Big Willie Robinson. He was famous for his bright orange 1969 Daytona, the same one that unfairly lost in 2-lane blacktop. So yeah, the winged warrior never truly went away. Even when the wings disappeared and the race cars looked normal again, the memory of the Daytona stayed strong. It lived in movies, in music, and cartoons, and in every dream garage a car fan could imagine. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked this video, so don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.